The first snowflake landed on Emma's cheek just after dawn. She brushed it away without thinking, her hands already numb from feeding the chickens. By noon, the sky had turned the color of old bruises, and the wind carried a warning that made her spine straighten with fear. She had lived in Montana long enough to know what was coming. This wasn't going to be one of those gentle snowfalls that dusted the mountains and melted by afternoon. This was going to be the kind of storm that buried fence posts and turned the world into a white maze where nothing looked familiar anymore. Her father had left 3 days ago to drive a herd of cattle to the winter pasture, promising he would be back before the weather turned. Her mother had gone with him, leaving Emma alone on the ranch with instructions written on a piece of paper tacked to the kitchen wall. Feed the animals twice daily. Keep the fire going. Don't let the water troughs freeze. Simple tasks for someone who had grown up doing them, but her parents had never left her alone during winter before. At 17, Emma was capable and strong, but capability meant nothing when nature decided to show its teeth. The horses sensed it before she did. Thunder and Maple, the 2 quarter horses her father kept for working the ranch, had been restless all morning. They paced their stalls, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling toward the mountains where the storm was gathering its strength. Emma gave them extra hay and checked the barn doors twice, making sure the latches were secure. The barn was old but solid, built by her grandfather's hands 50 years ago with timber cut from their own land. It had weathered storms before. It would weather this one too. By 2 in the afternoon, the snow was falling so thick she could barely see the house from the barn door. The wind screamed across the open fields, picking up the fresh powder and hurling it sideways in sheets of white that stung her face like needles. Emma made one last trip to the house, fighting against gusts that nearly knocked her off her feet. She filled a thermos with hot coffee, grabbed 2 wool blankets from the linen closet, and stuffed her pockets with matches and candles. The electricity had already started flickering, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the lines went down. The journey back to the barn felt like crossing an ocean. The wind tore at her coat and filled her boots with snow. She couldn't feel her fingers inside her gloves, and her face had gone beyond cold into a strange burning numbness. When she finally stumbled through the barn door and slammed it shut behind her, the silence felt like a physical presence. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that made the walls creak and groan. Inside, the horses nickered softly, their warm breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Emma's hands shook as she lit the kerosene lantern hanging from a beam. The weak golden light pushed back the shadows, revealing the familiar shapes of saddles and bridles hanging on the wall, bags of feed stacked in the corner, and the 2 stalls where Thunder and Maple watched her with dark, intelligent eyes. She had made the right choice coming back to the barn. The house was bigger, but it was also farther away, and if something happened to the animals during the night, she would never be able to reach them through the storm. Here, at least, she could keep watch. Here, she could make sure they survived whatever the night was going to bring. She wrapped herself in one of the blankets and settled onto a hay bale, listening to the storm tear at the world outside. The temperature was already dropping, and she knew that before morning came, she would understand exactly what it meant to be truly cold. Darkness came early, swallowed by the storm that had turned the world into nothing but wind and snow and the kind of cold that made breathing painful. Emma huddled deeper into her blankets, but they did little good. The barn walls kept out the wind, but they couldn't keep out the temperature that dropped with every passing hour. Her thermos of coffee was already lukewarm, and she rationed it carefully, taking small sips that did almost nothing to warm her from the inside out. The kerosene lantern flickered on its beam, casting dancing shadows that made the barn feel both smaller and more vast at the same time. Thunder stamped his hooves and tossed his head, his breath coming out in great plumes of steam. Maple pressed against the stall door, nickering softly as if asking Emma what was going to happen next. She wished she had an answer. All she knew was that the storm showed no signs of stopping, and the cold was becoming dangerous. She had dressed in layers before leaving the house, wearing 2 pairs of socks, long underwear beneath her jeans, a flannel shirt under her heavy coat, but none of it was enough. Her feet had gone numb an hour ago, and now the numbness was creeping up her legs like frost climbing a window. She tried to stay awake, tried to keep moving, pacing back and forth across the barn floor to keep her blood flowing. But exhaustion pulled at her like an anchor. She hadn't slept well the night before, worried about the coming storm, and now her body was demanding rest at the worst possible time. She knew falling asleep in this cold was dangerous. People froze to death that way, drifting off into dreams they never woke from. But her eyelids were so heavy, and the hay bale was right there, and maybe if she just rested for a few minutes, she would feel stronger. When she opened her eyes again, the lantern had burned lower, and the cold had become something alive, something with teeth and claws that dug into her bones. She couldn't stop shivering. Her whole body shook violently, and when she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't support her weight. She collapsed back onto the hay, panic rising in her chest. This was bad. This was really bad. She was going into hypothermia, and there was no one coming to help her. Her parents wouldn't try to travel in this weather. They would assume she was safe in the house, never imagining she had chosen to spend the night in the barn. Through the fog in her mind, an idea formed. The horses. They were warm. Their bodies generated heat, and in their stalls, sheltered from even the reduced drafts in the barn, it would be warmer. She crawled toward Thunder's stall, her movements clumsy and slow. The big gelding watched her with concern, his ears forward, his nostrils flaring as he smelled her fear. She managed to open the stall door and drag herself inside. The difference was immediate. Thunder's body heat radiated through the small space, and the thick bed of straw on the floor held warmth like an insulator. Emma pressed herself against the stall wall in the corner where Thunder couldn't accidentally step on her. The horse seemed to understand. He shifted his weight, positioning himself between her and the stall door, creating a windbreak with his body. The warmth wasn't much, but it was enough to stop the violent shivering. She pulled the blankets tighter around herself and curled into a ball, trying to make herself as small as possible to conserve heat. Maple called out from the next stall, and Thunder answered with a low rumble in his chest. Time lost meaning. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of the storm still raging outside, aware of Thunder's steady presence, aware that she was still alive but only barely. At some point, she realized she couldn't feel her hands or feet at all anymore. At another point, she thought she heard voices, but that was impossible. No one could be out in this storm. She was hallucinating, her mind playing tricks as her body struggled to survive. Thunder shifted his weight, and the movement brought her back to something like awareness. She forced her eyes open and saw the horse looking down at her, his dark eyes full of something that looked almost like worry. She tried to tell him she was okay, but her lips wouldn't form the words. All she could do was close her eyes again and hope that morning would come before the cold claimed her completely. The voice was real. Emma heard it again, louder this time, cutting through the howl of the wind. Someone was calling out, the words muffled and distant but definitely human. She tried to respond, tried to call back, but her throat was so dry and her lips so numb that nothing came out but a faint whisper. Thunder heard it too. His head came up sharply, ears pricked forward, listening. Then he did something Emma had never heard him do before. He screamed. Not a whinny or a neigh, but a high, piercing scream that horses make when they are terrified or calling for help. The barn door crashed open, and snow swirled inside on a gust of wind so strong it nearly extinguished the dying lantern. A figure stumbled through, covered head to toe in white, looking more like a ghost than a person. Emma's frozen mind couldn't process what she was seeing. The figure moved quickly, closing the door against the storm, then pulled back a snow-covered hood to reveal a man's face. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with ice in his dark beard and worry in his eyes that swept the barn until they found Thunder's stall. "Hello?" he called out, his voice rough and urgent. "Is someone here? I saw the light from the road." Thunder stomped and tossed his head, then deliberately looked down at the corner where Emma lay. The man moved fast, crossing the barn in long strides, and when he opened the stall door and saw her curled on the straw, his face went pale. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling off his thick gloves to press his fingers against her neck, checking for a pulse. Emma tried to focus on his face, tried to tell him she was okay, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "Jesus," he breathed. "How long have you been out here?" He didn't wait for an answer she couldn't give. Instead, he stood and looked around the barn, his mind clearly racing through options. Okay. I need to get you warm, and I can't take you back out in that storm. It's suicide out there." He moved with purpose, gathering the things Emma had brought from the house, finding more blankets in a storage chest, pulling off his own heavy coat to wrap around her. His name was Cole, and he had been trying to reach his uncle's cabin 3 miles up the mountain when the storm became too dangerous. He had seen the faint glow of the barn lantern through the blizzard and fought his way toward it, hoping to find shelter. Instead, he found Emma, half frozen and barely conscious, being guarded by a horse who clearly understood the situation better than any animal should. Cole worked quickly, his movements efficient and practiced. He had grown up in these mountains too, and he knew what hypothermia looked like. "Can you hear me?" he asked, lifting her carefully and carrying her out of the stall. Emma managed a small nod. "Good. That's good. Stay with me. I'm going to get you warm, I promise." He laid her down on a pile of blankets he had arranged near where Maple's stall met the wall, creating a sheltered corner. Then he did something that made Emma's foggy mind clear just enough to protest weakly. He started a small fire. I know, he said, seeing her alarm. Fire in a barn is dangerous, but you freezing to death is more dangerous. I'm keeping it small and controlled, and I'll watch it every second. He had found a metal bucket and filled it with scraps of wood from broken boards and old fence posts stored in the corner. The flames caught quickly, and the heat was immediate and glorious. Emma felt it on her face first, then spreading slowly through her body as Cole wrapped her in every blanket he could find and positioned her close to the fire but not too close. He worked through the night, keeping the fire burning, keeping her warm, checking her pulse and breathing every few minutes. He talked to her constantly, telling her about growing up in Montana, about working on ranches, about the time he got caught in a storm like this when he was 15 and learned to respect the mountains in winter. His voice became an anchor, something to hold on to when the exhaustion tried to pull her under. And gradually, painfully, feeling began to return to her hands and feet. It came with agony, a burning pins and needles sensation that made her gasp and tears leak from the corners of her eyes. That's good, Cole said gently, seeing her reaction. Pain means your nerves are still working. You're going to be okay. He gave her small sips of water from his own canteen and shared a protein bar from his pack. As the hours passed and dawn approached, Emma finally found her voice. Thank you, she whispered. Cole smiled, and it transformed his worried face into something warm and kind. Thank your horse, he said, nodding toward Thunder. He's the one who called me over. The storm continued its assault on the world outside, but inside the barn, something had shifted. Emma was no longer alone, no longer fighting for survival by herself. Cole kept the small fire burning and talked to her through the remaining hours of darkness, his voice steady and calm, a counterpoint to the screaming wind. He told her about his life, about the ranch where he worked 50 miles north, about how he had been driving to his uncle's cabin to check on the property when the storm had caught him. He talked about his childhood, about learning to ride before he could walk, about summers spent fixing fences and winters spent feeding cattle in weather that would make most people quit. Emma listened, her mind growing clearer as warmth slowly returned to her body. She told him about the ranch, about her parents who were stranded at the winter pasture, about her decision to stay in the barn with the animals. Cole didn't judge her for it. Instead, he nodded with understanding. I would have done the same thing, he said. You couldn't have known the storm would be this bad, and you couldn't leave them alone. It was the right choice, just bad luck that it got so cold. As Emma recovered, she became more aware of Cole as a person rather than just a rescuer. He had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had spent his life working hard. There was a quietness to him, a steadiness that made her feel safe. He checked on the horses regularly, giving them water and extra hay, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that made Thunder and Maple relax despite the storm. He treated the animals with the same care and attention he gave Emma, and something about that made her trust him completely. Do you think it will stop soon? She asked, her voice still rough but stronger than before. Cole looked toward the barn door, listening to the wind. Hard to say. Storms like this can blow through in a few hours or last for days. We'll know more when the sun comes up. He added another small piece of wood to the fire. Either way, we're safe here. We have shelter, heat, water, and enough food to last a couple days if we need it. Your horses are fine, and you're recovering. That's what matters. Emma studied his profile in the firelight. Why were you really going to your uncle's cabin in this weather? No one with any sense drives into the mountains when a storm is coming. Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. My uncle passed away 3 months ago. Left me the cabin in his will. I've been putting off going there because it's hard, you know? Going to a place that was so full of life and knowing it's empty now. But I woke up yesterday morning and felt like I needed to go. Like something was pulling me there. Stupid, probably, to drive into a storm because of a feeling. Not stupid, Emma said softly. If you hadn't, I would have frozen to death. Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Sometimes life worked in mysterious ways, bringing people together in circumstances so unlikely they felt like fate. Cole had lost someone he loved and followed an inexplicable urge into a dangerous storm. Emma had chosen to protect her animals and nearly paid for it with her life. And somehow, impossibly, they had found each other in the darkness. The wind began to ease as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the barn walls. The storm wasn't over, but it had lost some of its fury. Cole carefully extinguished the fire, making absolutely sure every ember was cold before standing and stretching his stiff muscles. I'm going to check the door, see what we're dealing with, he said. Emma tried to stand, but her legs were still weak and unsteady. Cole was beside her in an instant, his arm supporting her. "Easy," he said. "Your body has been through a lot. Give it time." Together, they made their way to the barn door. When Cole opened it, they were met with a wall of snow that had drifted against the building. The storm had deposited at least 4 feet of powder, maybe more in places, and the world beyond was a blinding expanse of white under heavy gray clouds. The wind had dropped to a steady blow rather than the violent gusts of the night, but snow was still falling. "We're not getting out of here today," Cole said, closing the door again. "But that's okay. We have everything we need." He looked at Emma, his expression serious. "Your parents are probably worried sick. Do you have any way to contact them?" Emma shook her head. "The phone lines are probably down, and I left my cell phone in the house. I didn't think I would need it." She felt a sudden overwhelming guilt. Her parents would be frantic, imagining the worst, and there was no way to tell them she was alive. Cole squeezed her shoulder gently. "They'll know you're smart and resourceful. They'll know you found shelter. And as soon as the storm breaks enough, we'll get to the house and try to reach them." He smiled. "Until then, we wait. We keep the horses comfortable, we keep ourselves warm, and we wait for nature to calm down. We've survived the worst of it." By late afternoon on the second day, the storm finally exhausted itself. The wind died to nothing, and the snow stopped falling, leaving behind a world transformed into something alien and beautiful. Drifts had piled against every structure, sculpted by the wind into smooth, impossible curves that looked more like art than weather. The sky cleared slowly, revealing a pale blue expanse that made the white landscape seem even brighter. Emma stood at the barn door with Cole, both of them squinting against the glare, marveling at the silence after so many hours of howling chaos. Cole had spent the time making Emma rest and recover, feeding her portions of the emergency supplies from his truck that he had managed to retrieve during a brief lull in the storm. He had found instant soup packets, energy bars, and a camping stove that made hot meals possible. They had talked for hours, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Emma learned that Cole was saving money to buy his own ranch someday, a small place where he could raise horses and live a quiet life. Cole learned that Emma wanted to be a veterinarian, that she loved the ranch but also dreamed of seeing more of the world before settling down. The conversations had been easy and natural, punctuated by comfortable silences when words weren't necessary. They had worked together to care for Thunder and Maple, developing a rhythm that felt like they had been doing it for years rather than hours. Emma noticed how gentle Cole was with the animals, how he spoke to them like they could understand every word, how he never rushed or raised his voice. She noticed other things too, like the way his face lit up when he laughed, and how he always made sure she was warm and comfortable before thinking about himself. Now, looking at the drifted snow between the barn and the house, Cole made a decision. "I'll break trail," he said. "The house can't be more than 100 yards, but in snow this deep, it might as well be a mile." He had found snowshoes in the barn, old wooden ones that belonged to Emma's grandfather, and he strapped them on with practiced efficiency. "Stay here where it's warm. I'll get inside, find your phone, and call your parents. Then I'll come back for you." Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could make it herself, but she was still weaker than she wanted to admit. "Be careful," she said instead. Cole grinned. "Always am." Then he set off through the snow, his movements steady and deliberate, each step punching through the crust and sinking deep before finding solid ground. Emma watched him go, her heart doing something strange in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold or the lingering effects of hypothermia. She had known this man for less than 2 days, but it felt like longer. It felt like she had known him forever. He returned an hour later, his face flushed from exertion but smiling. "Got through to your parents. They are safe at the Hendersons' place, about 10 miles from the winter pasture. They've been going crazy with worry, but they're okay now. Your dad says the roads won't be passable for at least a week, but they know you're safe." He paused, his expression turning slightly uncertain. "I hope you don't mind, but I told them about the situation. About you being in the barn, about the hypothermia. Your mom wants you in the house where it's warm, and honestly, I agree. Think you can make it if I help you?" Emma nodded. Cole had cleared a path through the snow, and with his support, she made her way slowly toward the house. Her legs were steadier than they had been, but she was grateful for his arm around her waist, keeping her stable. When they finally stumbled through the front door into the kitchen, the warmth from the wood stove hit her like a physical thing. Cole had gotten it burning hot, and the whole room felt like heaven. Over the next few days, as they waited for the roads to clear, Emma and Cole fell into a routine. They took care of the animals together, trudging through the snow twice a day to the barn. They cooked meals in the kitchen, shared stories by the fire, and played cards to pass the time. Cole insisted on sleeping on the couch, giving Emma her own room, but often in the evenings they would both fall asleep in front of the fire, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Emma's parents finally made it home 6 days after the storm. They pulled up to the house in a borrowed truck with chains on the tires, and her mother was out of the vehicle before it even stopped fully, running through the snow to pull Emma into a crushing hug. There were tears and explanations and more hugs, and then her father shook Cole's hand with a grip that spoke of profound gratitude. "You saved my daughter's life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Cole shook his head. "Emma saved herself by being smart and brave. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." But his eyes found Emma's across the room, and the look that passed between them said something different. It said that maybe it wasn't just chance or luck. Maybe it was something more. When it was time for Cole to leave, to drive back to the ranch where he worked, Emma walked him out to his truck. The sun was shining, and the world sparkled with fresh snow and new possibilities. "I don't suppose you'd want to stay in touch," she said, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Cole smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made her heart skip. "I was hoping you'd say that." He pulled out his phone and they exchanged numbers, their fingers brushing in a touch that felt electric even through gloves. "I'll call you," he said. "Tonight, if that's okay. And maybe I could come visit in a few weeks, see how you and the horses are doing." "I'd like that," Emma said softly. Cole climbed into his truck, but before he closed the door, he looked at her one more time. "You know, if I hadn't followed that crazy urge to drive into a storm, if I hadn't seen that light in the barn, if your horse hadn't called out, there were a lot of IFS that had to line up perfectly. Makes you think, doesn't it? About fate and timing and how sometimes the worst situations lead to the best things." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She watched him drive away, his truck navigating the cleared road carefully, until he disappeared around the bend. Then she turned back to the house where her parents waited, to the barn where Thunder and Maple needed feeding, to the life she had almost lost and now got to keep. And she thought about a stranger who had become something more in the space of a few frozen days, and about how sometimes survival meant more than just staying alive. Sometimes it meant finding exactly what you didn't know you were looking for, in the last place you ever expected to find it.